You're listening to the District Download, a Louisville Metro Council podcast. Metro Louisville is made up of 26 districts. This podcast gives you the chance to connect with your council member and learn about what's going on in the city.
Greetings for the latest edition of Metro Council's District Download podcast. Today's podcast will be hosted by Councilman Stuart Benson, who serves District 20 in southeastern Jefferson County. Councilman Benson will lead us on a discussion regarding efforts to bring high-speed internet access to underserved areas of our community. Councilman Benson will also be joined by Charter Spectrum's Communications Senior Director of State Government Affairs, Ellen Call, as well as the Director of Government Affairs, Ben Usalis. Today, to start today's podcast, I would like to introduce our host for today's program, Councilman Stuart Benson. Councilman Benson, could you please tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your district you serve?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate you all doing this podcast. District 20 is the largest of all the districts, roughly from Bardstown Road to the Shelbyville Road to the county line. But it's been in and out in the last several census. You know, it's changed the constituents. I just tell people, if you've been in my district, you have a problem, just call me up. I'm glad to help you. Government's supposed to help out and serve. And there's all kinds of neighborhoods with part of cities, J-Town and stuff. But our goal is to work with everybody to solve a problem. I was a teacher. I taught vocational education for 28 years. I used to be a tool and die maker. GE spent about $100,000 to teach me back in the 60s to be a tool and die maker. Decided to teach vocational education, and in the 28 years, I put over 500 kids in jobs. I really believe when you get out of school and you can't get a job, school didn't really help you. Everybody needs a job. I was elected in 2002. I really didn't think I'd win. I did, and I've been blessed ever since then. My first wife died. We had 3 daughters, Laura, Stacy, and Mandy, and I married Chris, my wife, and she had 2 daughters, Tammy and Tricia. I've always told my daughters, you can be anything you want to, you just have to work. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am. If anybody has any issues, I always tell them, give me a call.
Okay. Next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, our podcast guest, and that's Charter Spectrum Communications Senior Director of State and Government Affairs, Ms. Ellen Call.
Hi, Steve, and hi, Councilman Benson. It's good to be back here. So my name is Ellen Call, and I work in government affairs in Kentucky and Tennessee for Charter Spectrum. And I am really happy to be back here because I've known Stuart and Steve for 21 years now. And I think this was our old caucus room. My old office is across the hall when I served on the Metro Council with Councilman Benson for 6 years, from 2002 to 2008. I have been with either Insight or Time Warner Cable or Charter since 2010. Ben and I actually started on the same day in 2010, so we have been in this industry for 13 years. And I can tell you that for every one of those 13 years, Councilman, we have heard concerns from your constituents who are desperate for broadband service. And for so many years, we were able to help a few people here and there. And finally, we are so thrilled that we should be able to get all of your constituents who do not have access to broadband service connected. And we're very excited about the project.
Thank you, Ellen. And our final participant in today's podcast is Mr. Ben Usalis. He serves as Director of Government Affairs with Charter Spectrum.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. Always good to be here. A lifelong Louisvillian, born and raised here. And like Ellen said, we started in this industry, 13 years ago or so, which seems impossible, but here we are. And really for the last few years, our focus has been on broadband expansion. I think COVID really shined a bright light on the issue. If anyone didn't think broadband was an issue before, they knew after COVID that the folks that did not have access to quality broadband needed to get access. And so we've seen governments at all levels step up, and thankfully providers like ours have stepped up to meet the moment. And really over those past 3 years, that's been my focus, is working across the state with state and local governments to identify projects and come up with solutions to get folks connected to quality broadband. And so happy to be here talking with you all today and talking about a big project that we have going on right here in Louisville.
Now that we've introduced our podcast participants, let's turn our conversation to our topic, which is an update on the efforts that are underway to bring high-speed internet access to rural and other underserved areas of our community. Councilman Benson, let's start with you. Could you please explain to me and to the listeners a little bit about how we got to your office kind of taking a lead role in addressing this problem?
Well, I appreciate that question. I'm very fortunate. I got an aide who's a computer programmer, Angela Webster, and and when people would call our office about internet and speeds and stuff, it was good to have somebody know what they're doing and know the language. And with Ellen being over at Charter Spectrum, listening to us, and you can't do something without money, and you can't force a company to go bankrupt in trying to expand. That's what government's supposed to help out, infrastructure. But working with her, leading us to find out where there's some grants, and our office put up $250,000 to try to move the thing forward. But we couldn't have done it without you, Ellen, helping us identify the issues, trying to work through the program, and Angela, my aide. But then when COVID come along and we had all these kids going to the parks and the buses and stuff because the area didn't have internet, and they couldn't do their work. And that's not fair. Everybody should have, fair education, free. And so when we identified that problem, when the news media picked up on it, it's moved forward. And I think what Charter Spectrum is going to do with us is really help our constituents have what everybody else has.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Councilman Benson deserves a tremendous amount of credit for getting this project off the ground. We're funding this project through our own capital, but also through a state grant. And then there was a Louisville RFP that we competed for and won. But something really critical that you did that helped was, you pledged that $250,000 as a local match for the state grant. And I would imagine that was tremendously helpful. Something, an important fact that the Broadband office considered when they awarded that to us. I'm sure that was a really important factor, and that showed a lot of leadership, and it really helped get the ball rolling that you did that.
I appreciate you saying that. To me, I'm a Christian, and it is more blessed to give than receive. And when you see that you're helping people make their lives better, there's no more reward.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
So one of the things that, again, it wasn't just COVID that brought this about. This has been going on for almost, 6 to 10 years. And so one of the things that I want people to understand as they're listening to this podcast is kind of the behind the scenes actions that had to take place. And so, Ellen, you just brought up the grant writing, and that's not a process that's overnight. That's a process that I think it was about a year, didn't it? As far as, both applying for federal and state grants. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I'm going to turn this over to our broadband expert, Mr. Ben Ucelis, who's in charge of, putting all these grants together. But so Ben, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, happy to. And it might be best to just kind of step back and get a review of everything that is going on here, because there are lots of moving pieces, and it takes all those moving pieces to make a project like this a reality. Work with Councilman Benson's office and other folks at the city to help scope the project and identify the project, work at the state level on that grant writing and all of that, as well as all the moving parts internally within our company to make that happen. So you're right. Several years ago, we started this process and looked to identify areas of need across Kentucky, and really we're doing it across the country. And one of those areas that we identified early on was here in Louisville. We identified some homes that were unserved. And so we worked with the city and put together this initial state grant application. And so the state, as you've probably heard, has had a significant amount of ARPA funding that they received to help support different initiatives, including broadband expansion. This is coming out of COVID funding. And so the first round of funding they put up, we submitted an application and we identified an area. This is about 714 homes in Louisville that we applied for in this project. And thankfully, after a long process of submitting applications and dealing with challenges and other processes with the state broadband program, we got to the point where we won that award. And so that was kind of phase one of this. And then on a parallel line, we were working directly with the city on the RFP that Ellen mentioned, which identified another 1,166 homes. So all in all, we're just shy of about 1,900 homes across Louisville that we are connecting to broadband. That's through that state grant as well as this now local partnership that we have with the city. And to Councilman Benson's point earlier, yes, Angela Webster in your office and other folks in the city have been critical in helping us identify additional homes. They found even more that were in need of service, and we worked together to kind of scope the project so that we could say we were covering as many as possible, hoping to get just about everyone who's unserved today covered with this project. And so, yes, lots of moving parts, lots of pieces to this, but these kinds of large infrastructure projects won't work if you don't have that level of involvement from everyone. Thankfully, we have that here, and that's why this good project is going to move forward.
And Councilman Benson.
Ben, thanks very much. Angela Webster, my aide, probably knows everybody who needs the internet. I just like things happening, and when we work together, like you say, you identified some other people. That is so exciting when other people get helped along the way that you didn't think they was going to get help, and so that's why we need to work on problems together. And just take the problem we're working on and solve that problem. And thank you guys so much.
Well, you're welcome. And you raise a good point about Angela's role because our mapping capabilities are getting better every day, but they're not perfect, right? And Angela, from answering the phone for years and years and talking to people and knowing your district like the back of her hand, she was, as Ben said, she was able to identify some other folks that needed help. And so we added them to the scope of the project, thanks to her.
It's great.
And in many ways, Stuart, you're known for being about infrastructure and bringing infrastructure to the community. And normally people are talking about roads, and sometimes people think about sewers and stuff. But frankly, in the 21st century, high-speed internet access has become almost as important as those issues. And so that's something else that, you can take a lot of pride in having been part of, but also creating like a Facebook page for people to be able to sign up, or other web links and forums and that sort of thing that people could be able to register. But one of the things we've talked about in the past was, with COVID and the shutdowns that occurred, people didn't realize when they start, telling people to work from home, that isn't always as possible. So you want to talk about that a little bit, Stuart, as far as from schools?
Yeah, well, just before the schools, we started having doctors and lawyers needing access to X-rays or documents, and they couldn't get them. And I didn't know necessarily what Angela knew, and she was one that's kind of really pushing to make sure that everybody's has the access. And then when COVID came along, and we had kids on buses and parks and stuff trying to do their work, everybody started realizing this isn't really fair. And the news media started realizing what's going on. And see, that's what happens sometimes. Constituents drive issues. And if something's important, get involved and make people know we can solve the problem. I just need to know what the problems are, and together we can solve them.
So next, get a little technical on how this has moved from the identifying stage to the actual planning stage and deployment. Can you all talk a little bit about what Spectrum Charter is going through as far as, we've identified these 1,900 homes or so, but then what's the next step once we got past that, once we got past some of the initial funding grants?
It's a process, and it's to your point, Councilman, it is a large infrastructure investment, and so it's a large infrastructure deployment process. But so there is lots of work that goes into these deployments. When you first get an award or start a project, there's a period of 6 to 9 months at least where a lot of behind the scenes work is happening. It might seem to constituents like there's nothing going on, but it's our team working behind the scenes to design the project. So we we've identified the homes, but now we have to go out and we have to walk every road. We have to examine every household, every driveway, every creek and ditch and railroad and everything you're going to come across along this build. And more importantly, we have to identify every single pole. So when we deploy fiber, we attach to utility poles. We generally follow the trail of electrical. So if the electrical's up on poles, we're going to be up on poles. If it's underground, we'll go underground. And so a large part of this process is identifying those poles. Actually, we have to take a picture next to every single pole, holding a measuring tape, showing where the lines are. It's a very involved process, and we're talking about thousands of poles across this project that we have to do that for. So that is all a data gathering process. We take all that data back in-house and fully design out the project so that our teams who will eventually build the project know exactly where to hook every line along the route. That data is also used for permitting. So a big part of this process is we have to get permits to access those poles. They're owned, like I said, by the local utility. So LG&E owns the majority of the poles for this project. And so we have to work closely with those utility providers to get access to the poles. We pay for the attachment. We pay a rental fee to be on the poles. We pay for any work that needs to be done, but we need their blessing and their electrical engineering work to be done first before we can access. And that's kind of the stage we're in right now. A lot of that early design stage is fully complete, and we've started submitting our permit applications to get on those poles so we can start hanging fiber. Once we have access to the poles, then it's just putting the fiber up and connecting homes, and that's the fun part. But so there's a lot that goes in behind the scenes, and there's a lot of work we're doing internally. We've had calls with the city and LG&E to look through this whole project, make sure they understand what's coming around the corner to them, and hopeful they can turn those around as quickly as possible. Depending on how quickly those permits get turned around, will determine how quickly the project ultimately gets built and how quickly folks are connected to internet.
Yeah, and the one thing that I just wanted to add to what Ben said, this is a huge construction project, right? And what happens is after the permits come back and we have permission to attach to the utility poles, we will start the construction and we will activate homes as we go along, right? So homes will be activated in phases. It's not like you work for a solid year and then light up everybody all at once. So that's a piece of good news because we activate people as quickly as we can, homes and businesses.
That's right. We break the project essentially into small boundaries of about 200 homes along the way. And as we activate that boundary, we can light that up and then go on to the next one. So we're not waiting for the full project to be complete.
And you said something that was interesting that I had not thought of, and that is railroads and
Yeah.
other utilities that you're, essentially going through, and that adds a whole new level of complication than just working with your local electric company. And so that's something I can appreciate even more is some of the challenges you do dealing with federally based type organizations that sometimes are a little bit slow to react as well.
There are federal implications. There are state roads and state highways, and then there are personal private property rights that sometimes we have to go through people's yards to get to a certain place, and we can't do that if we don't have the permission from the property owner. So we have to work with individual property owners. There are so many layers. We work right down the hall from our construction team, and I'm amazed every day at how much work they're doing because this is just one of our many projects across the state. Right now we have projects in place to build out to roughly 90,000 unserved homes across Kentucky. Through different state grants, federal grants, and local partnerships. So we're very busy because each one of those has its own details and complications that we're working through. But we're determined to get this stuff built, and hopefully we can do it as quickly as we can.
I believe the term is last mile is kind of essentially getting to the point of hooking up with a house. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then so with that, will you be going into only the houses that you all serve, or are you going to be contacting the entire neighborhood? How does that operate?
So we have a defined project area that we are building to. And again, that project area are all homes that we identified working with the city as being in need of service. They do not have high-speed quality broadband service. So the folks who are here, in the city limits, suburban areas already have access to our service or other high-speed providers. They're good. these are the areas we're looking at that don't have anything. And so, yes, so this is a last mile project. So we are, and I like to tell people, we're not just coming down the road, but we're coming to the house. So if we're coming down your road, but you sit half a mile off the street, we've already taken into account the cost it's going to take to get to your actual house. So we will be connecting your home if you want it. And there's no guarantee with this project that every person's going to sign up with us. We hope they do, and we hope we provide them with a service that they don't have currently, so they're going to take advantage of it. But we're going to build the area. We're going to make it possible for any of those folks to get access to our service, and then those who want it can sign up with us and become customers.
And Ben raises a really good point because we are so grateful for the partnership with the state and the city to get these homes built. But we are also risking several $1 million of our own capital on this project. And as Ben said, we're gonna build a really beautiful network where people have access to the highest speeds available anywhere in the whole country. But nobody has to sign up if they don't want to, right? And obviously, we expect that folks will be excited and that they'll be quite anxious to sign up, but you don't know that. There's no guarantee of that. So that's why, I just wanted to make that point. That's why it's important that our investment, is helpful too.
What the point you're making is absolutely right. But it's kind of like somebody buying a piece of property and somebody says, "We're running water here." Oh, we don't want water. We don't want electricity. You think, do you understand what you're giving away? And so anybody who might be watching this podcast and haven't been contacted, let us know. Let us talk to you a little bit to make sure you know the amenities you're giving up. Everybody should be like you say, I know most of these people are really excited. I'm excited because, to see people who thought that they weren't going to get something, now they see a light at the end of the tunnel. And the goal is always to try to make everybody's life a little bit better. And so we just need to make sure everybody knows what they're going to have a chance to get.
And just like you were saying, I mean, this is an amenity that people who are buying houses are going to be wanting to know more about.
Absolutely.
5 or 10 years ago, some people, when they were purchasing their house, didn't think about this and regretted it later. I think people are more and more aware and more dependent on these services. And so, if you want to help essentially add to the value of your home and add to the ability to sell it at a later date or to be able to adjust as times adjust, you'll be ready for this.
Well, it's easier to do it when you're doing it. And then it's coming back and doing it afterwards. You're going to pay. Plus, it's going to be really expensive because nobody's there. They got to redo the system, and so you need to pay attention and know what you want to give up. And so sometimes I don't know if it's a person's 90 years old, never been on the internet, they might give up something, and somebody needs to talk to their children or something. Said, you know what, your dad could have or something, and to make sure that everybody's conscious of the amenity, because this is a great thing for our community, and thanks so much for Charter Spectrum for putting the money up and sticking with us and not thinking we're nuts. This is important. And we're thankful.
Well, and we appreciate it. And listen, we know it's important because I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with Angela Webster over the years where your constituents have reached out for help, and we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've been able to help a little bit until now. And after this project is over, I think just about everyone's going to be taken care of, I hope.
Can we talk a little bit about the services? You talked about, amongst the fastest speeds. Can we talk about the average person that is going to be served by this expansion, what that will mean to them at their home?
So this project will deploy fiber to the home technology to all 1,900 or so addresses we've identified. And so with that, they will have as fast a speeds as anyone across Louisville. They'll have gigabit symmetrical speeds available. Our entry-level speed is 300 megs, and it'll be symmetrical. So that means the same thing you're sending up to the internet, you're pulling down from the internet. It's the same speed. And so that, and they will also be as future-proof as you can be in this industry. We have plans in the future to go to multi-gig. I've heard 10 gig. I've heard we're doing fiber tests to do 25 gig. I mean, it's going to continue to go up, and they'll have the infrastructure. That's what's most exciting about this to me is, in the past, when we looked at rural deployment, it was what kind of Band-Aid can we put on this situation? Can we get them a little bit of speed? Can we get them some sort of connection, a wireless or some sort of connection to get them something? Now we're getting them effectively the same thing everybody else across the city and across the state's going to have. And so they will have the fastest speeds available anywhere. They will have access to our video product, our home phone product, our mobile service, which is the fastest growing mobile service in the country. In effect, what we're trying to do with this project and all the other ones across Kentucky is treat everyone the same. So if you're connected to our network currently, or you're going to be through one of these projects, you will have access to the same levels of speed, service, price, all that sort of stuff.
And that's another good point that Ben made about we treat everybody the same because our pricing is consistent all across the country. We offer service in New York and LA and Hawaii and all over the country in 41 states. Now, there are some broadband providers it's so expensive to build out to rural areas. Some broadband providers charge rural residents higher prices for their broadband. We don't. We treat everybody the same, and we're really proud about that.
I mean, that's great. And part of my district years ago, 1939, Whirlpool was going to build a factory out there by Fisherville.
Mm-hmm.
Then the war came along and they didn't. But that area out there is zoned industrial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's not any really big companies, but because the internet makes a big difference in a lot of companies. Mm-hmm. Having it out there, it'll make a lot more people think different. And we're talking about economics of having more money for our community. In a positive way. So what you're all doing is this not just helping individuals in their houses. We're helping our community make have more money.
Yeah, I think that's true.
To me, that's one of the most exciting things about these sorts of projects. Obviously, we know we're going to get folks connected so their kids can do schoolwork from home. They can work from home, contact their health providers from home. I don't think we've realized the implications yet of when you have a community like this that is now fully covered with broadband, what other opportunities? Now people can start businesses from their home. They can, to your point, employers can come in and be more secure in knowing that there's broadband availability everywhere. So I'm hopeful there's a lot more implications to come.
Yeah. And one of the things we've spent a lot of time focusing on District 20, but the fact is this is about more than just Councilman Stuart Benson's area. There are other areas of the community that are also being affected by this. Could we talk about the other districts, the other sections of Louisville that are also going to see improvements in their services?
Absolutely. And so, yes, we've worked closely with Councilman Benson's office to identify homes. But you're right. I mean, when we originally ran our design and did our mapping, it was to identify any homes in the city-county limits that are unserved. And so you'll see, and I can share maps and things like that, but it's pretty universal. It stretches down as pretty far south, it stretches far northeast, and it's all kind of scattered across the county lines. And so, yeah, our goal with this was to identify as many as possible, to Ellen's point, hopefully trying to get as close to possible to 100% coverage as you can. Now that's tough to get because you're always going to, like to Ellen's point, the mapping's never perfect. There may be a home or two here that we missed. But the good news is when you do a project like this, you now have broadband stretching out to the far reaches of the county limits. Now, let's say we did miss a house or two, now you have broadband everywhere else. It becomes so much easier to identify projects and get other folks connected. So expansion kind of breeds more expansion.
Right. And because, listen, especially in your district, because as you mentioned, it's geographically the biggest one in Metro Louisville, I'm sure you have other housing developments being planned, right? When you do a project like this, you have to take a snapshot and agree on a scope of work, right? Obviously, over the next few years, these new houses and developments will be built, but as Ben said, it will be, because our network will be so greatly expanded, it will be so much easier and cost effective to get to those folks.
Absolutely.
that will be moving in over the next few years.
So one of the goals that we discussed with this podcast was to help people understand kind of why it's taken the amount of time that it's taken and understand that it's not just simply about somebody running a line. I think we've gone over that now. the next step is when are we going to see, when are we going to start seeing houses lit up, and what is kind of the timeline moving forward? Could we talk about that a little bit?
So effectively, these projects are on a 2-year timeline, right? So that's 2 years from, it would have been, I guess, earlier March this year, I guess, is when it was effectively signed. So that would be 2 years from earlier this March. So that's March of 25. However, to my point earlier, it's all going to come down to how quickly we can get access to poles. And that's why we're having these conversations with LG&E and the city now, because if we can get access to the poles a lot sooner, that means we get deployed a lot sooner. And so we see that kind of as the end date that we have to hit, but we want to build this as quickly as we possibly can. And so we're hopeful that these conversations we're having with LG&E will continue to progress. We'll work closely with them and hope to get these permits turned around quickly so we can get out there and build. That's the process we're in right now. So as soon as that process resolves itself, we're building and hooking people up. So hopefully sooner rather than later, but that March 25 date is the kind of drop dead end date.
Yeah, and in terms of where we are in the process right now, as Ben mentioned earlier, we have submitted some permits, quite a few, to the pole owners. I think that we'll be done with our piece of that maybe in a month or so, and then we need to wait for the utility companies to review those and do any kind of work they need to do on a few poles and give us access. And that process, it can take quite a while. We're working so closely with LG&E on this project and the city in a really great partnership. I'm hoping it won't take any longer than 6 months for them to do their piece of this. And then, as Ben said, we can get out there and start building as fast as we can go.
And part of the issue for LG&E is that they can't just put fiber optic next to an electrical line. There has to be distance requirements as well as who does the installation and all those types of things.
Sure.
So again, it's not just about throwing up a line on the pole, but there is engineering that is involved. So it's not just LG&E saying yay or nay. There is a lot of work that goes into just its placement.
Absolutely. To the point earlier, it's a big infrastructure investment, and so there are lots of moving pieces, including on the pole owner side. But we've seen projects. I'll give a couple examples. So we had a smaller project up in Trimble County, where we had some identified rural areas, and the pole owner up there came in, looked at the whole project. It was Shelby Energy. And they identified all the poles that they would need to be replaced. They purchased all of those up front. We actually rented some land for them to store them, and they came in and did all of their work in 5 or 6 weeks. That project's done. All those folks are activated. We've had other projects in other parts of the country and the state where pole permitting has taken over a year, and that can really bog down a project. So we've kind of seen it both ways. It is a lot of work. But we're willing to work with them as closely as possible to make it as smooth as possible for them so that we can hopefully get it turned around quickly.
So I'll move on and change the subject just a little bit, but we've talked about rural and what's going on as far as giving people access in some of the suburban areas of our community. What else is going on as far as Charter Spectrum in terms of projects that you have undergoing in areas such as the West End or parks or anything else that you all have got that you'd like to tell our listeners about?
Yeah, well, gosh, I mean, in Louisville, obviously, the project that we've been talking about is our biggest broadband expansion project. We also provide, Wi-Fi access in parts of the community. We are partners. You may have heard of the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's a $30 a month voucher for folks who need help. We participate in that and help a lot of people get access to internet. These are folks who couldn't afford it otherwise. And we have thousands and thousands, I would imagine. I don't know the exact number, but we're a really strong partner in that federal program to help folks who need it.
And one other thing I'll mention as well, in addition to all this rural broadband expansion that we're doing, we're also upgrading our existing network here in the city limits and suburban areas where we already serve. So the way I talked about these new areas will have access to full symmetrical speeds. We're upgrading everyone in our current footprint. That's something we're doing on our own dime to upgrade our existing network so that everyone will be future-proof as best as they can, so that faster and faster speeds will be able to be deployed for people who have service today and people who are getting connected through this other project. And that upgrade, I believe, will take place over the next year or two. I think some parts of the area may already be underway, but that's something we're doing as well, constantly trying to upgrade our infrastructure and make sure it's operating as fast as possible.
Yeah, and as been mentioned earlier, this network evolution that he's talking about that we're doing, completely on our own dime, completely separate from your project, but that will lead us to be able to provide multi-gig speeds, symmetrical speeds to our customers. And it's going to be pretty exciting.
It is exciting, and I appreciate you saying this. And, we have a newsletter. There's a lot of people in our community that do a lot of stuff, and nobody knows it. And to me, I like other people to know, all the people who are trying to make things better for others, whether it's you all, the company, whatever, and to highlight it. And when you always mention about permits and stuff, one of the things that I've found out when people say LG&E or water company or whatever, not doing whatever, I say, who? They say, what do you mean? Who you dealing with? Tell me that person, because that's the person who's causing is the bottleneck, whatever for whatever reason. I don't mind talking to them. I don't mind being involved, because I think we need to move forward. And sometimes some people don't realize the urgency. That's why you have emergency rooms and stuff. Things are emergency. Let's see if we can't move this forward, not trying to step on anybody, but let's be responsible for other people, helping them out, making their life a little better. And so anytime I can help, anytime all of us can help, we're at the same goal: solve a problem, make people's life better.
Yeah.
To finish out, Councilman Benson, could you tell listeners how they can reach you or your office?
I'm District 20. All the numbers down here, the number of the district is the last number. It's 574-11, and then whatever district. District 20 is ours, and all the other ones are go from 1 to 26. So call us. You can get on the internet, Stewart.Benson at
LouisvilleKY.gov.
Angela Webster, she'll be glad to talk to you. So call my office.
Okay. And again, Stuart Benson, 574-1120, or Stewart.Benson@LouisvilleKY.gov.
You can see I need help, and I appreciate it. People help me all the time.
Well, we'd like to thank everyone for listening to this podcast, and like to thank our participants, District 20 Councilman Stuart Benson, as well as Charter Communications Ellen Call and Ben Usalis for participating. The District Download is available on most social media platforms and produced every 2 weeks as a means for members of the Metro Council to communicate with the people we serve. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you will check us out again soon for our next edition of the Louisville Metro Council's District Download.
Thank you.